Dex Calloway had a rule about simple jobs. There was no such thing. The contract had said, retrieve the captive woman from the southeastern cell, deliver her to the Orem border contact, collect payment, leave. 3 steps. Clean. He had done harder things before breakfast on worse days. But that was before the woman had opinions about the route. Left, she said, from over his shoulder, her voice low and completely certain. Right takes us to the exit. Right takes us to the guard rotation. Left takes us to the drainage passage, which lets out 40 meters north of their outer wall. He went left. He didn't say anything about going left. He just went, because she was correct, and he was a professional, and professionals used good information when it appeared. Even when it appeared in the form of a captive who had been held underground for 4 months and still somehow knew the guard rotation. Her name, he did not know yet. The contract had not included it. Green woman, southeastern cell, do not ask questions. He had not asked questions. He was reconsidering this policy. She was tall, nearly his height, which was not common, with dark braided hair coming loose from what had once been an elaborate arrangement, and eyes the color of deep river water, steady and assessing. She moved like someone who had spent the 4 months memorizing the fortress rather than deteriorating in it. There was a bruise along her jaw, old and yellowing, and she had glanced at it exactly once in the cracked metal surface they had passed in the corridor, the way someone checks a problem they've already filed away and plan to address later. He popped his shoulder back into the socket somewhere in the 3rd tunnel. She heard the sound. She looked at him. Her expression moved, something that was not quite alarm and not quite respect and had a complicated relationship with both, and then it locked back down, smooth as a door closing, and she was looking straight ahead again. He respected that. They surfaced 20 minutes later into cold pre-dawn air that smelled like wet stone and pine. His extraction point was another 2 hours east. He started moving. She kept pace without being told. Your employer, she said, when they were far enough from the walls. Who contracted you? Can't say. Your name. Dex. A pause. That is all of it. That's all of it. She processed this the way someone processes an answer that is technically sufficient and personally unsatisfying. I am Vaila Grethorum, she said, and the name landed differently than names usually did. Like it was used to landing with weight and had not decided to stop. He had heard of the Orem family. The Iron Throne. The Northern Territories. He had absolutely heard of them. Okay, he said. She looked at him sideways. You know the name. I do. And nothing. Still 2 hours to the border. Watch the tree root. She watched the tree root. She did not pursue it further. He had the distinct impression this was because she was choosing not to, which was a different thing entirely from having nothing to say. The Orem stronghold received them at sunrise. It was the kind of place that had been built to make you feel small and had gotten very good at it over several centuries. Stone towers. Gates with ironwork that probably had a name. A courtyard where every surface was doing something ceremonially significant if you knew where to look. Dex did not know where to look. He was looking for the payment contact. What he found instead was a court in full assembly, which at sunrise on a Tuesday struck him as extremely unreasonable. Advisors. Guards in formal armor. An older man on a raised step whose posture indicated he was either the ruler or someone who had decided to act like one and had not been corrected. Vaila walked into the courtyard and something happened in the air. The advisors straightened. The guards went still. Her father, Dex understood now that it was her father, moved toward her with an expression that had cracked open briefly before training sealed it back, and they touched foreheads, a gesture that was clearly personal in a context that was clearly public, and it lasted 3 seconds before they both stepped back and became formal again. He felt, obscurely, that he had seen something he was not supposed to see. Then Vaila turned to the assembled court and began speaking in Orcish, and her voice was completely different. Broader. It filled the courtyard without effort, the way water fills a shape. This was a voice that had been trained for exactly this purpose and had been doing it so long that the training was invisible. He caught his name. Or not his name, the shape of it, dropped into the flow of another language. The translator appeared at his elbow. Young, serious-faced, holding a piece of paper and, For reasons Dex had not yet understood, a length of braided red and black cord. The heiress announces, the translator said, that a debt of blood and honor has been incurred by this house to the individual called Dex, and that by the law of the Iron Throne, this debt must be formally bound before the court, acknowledged in ceremony, and discharged through the ancient rite of. I just need the payment, Dex said. The contact who hired me. Invoice, coin, or transfer, I'm flexible. The translator blinked. The ceremony supersedes. Does it supersede the contract? It supersedes most things. Dex looked at the braided cord. He put his hand in his pocket. The gate was undergoing maintenance. This was explained to him by a worker who seemed genuinely apologetic and had a very convincing set of tools. Dex looked at the tools. He looked at the gate. The gate was a large iron structure that had functioned without apparent issue for several hundred years. How long? He asked. Difficult to say, the worker said. He tried the side passage. There was a ritual cleansing in progress. He tried the northern corridor. It was closed for a walkway inspection that, as far as he could tell, involved two men looking at a perfectly good floor with great seriousness. He found his horse in the stables, better fed than he was, in a stall with fresh hay, thoroughly and unnecessarily groomed. His horse looked comfortable. His horse was not going anywhere. He sat down on a hay bale and considered his situation. He was being detained. This was clear. What was interesting was the method, not chains, not guards at his back, just an entire fortress that had developed a series of inconvenient logistical problems every time he moved toward an exit. It was the most sophisticated cage he had ever been in, and part of him, the professional part, which unfortunately never went quiet, noted that it was also the most comfortable. They had given him a room. The room had a window and a real bed and a wash basin with hot water. The food that had appeared, unrequested, on a tray outside the door had been better than most things he had eaten in the last year. He had eaten it and felt obscurely that this was a tactical error. Vaila found him in the stables an hour later. She was dressed differently now, formal, layered, the kind of clothing that was also a kind of armor. Her hair had been rebraided into its original arrangement. She was holding the cord again. She sat down on the hay bale across from him with the particular economy of a person who does not do casual and is choosing to approximate it. You are unhappy, she said. I'm professional. There's a difference. You tried 4 exits in one morning. I counted 3. The tack room also connects to the outer wall. You paused at it. He had paused at it. He looked at her. You had me watched. I had you kept safe, she said, and said it in a tone that did not particularly invite debate. He decided to debate it anyway. Kept is the operative word. The debt ceremony is not optional. It is law. Your law. The only law in this territory. She said it without heat, simply as a fact of the landscape. The sky is blue. The Orem law is the only law. You returned the firstborn of the Iron Throne from captivity. This is not a small thing that is settled with an invoice. It's exactly that kind of thing. She looked at him for a moment. You truly do not want acknowledgement. I want to be paid and leave. Those are different from acknowledgement. Most men who do what you did want something. She said this not as an accusation. More like a variable she was still solving for. Power. Access. A named position. Marriage alliance. I'm going to stop you there. Information, trading rights, a seat at the. I have a next job, he said. In 3 weeks. If I'm still here in 3 weeks, someone else doesn't get retrieved. That's the math. The cord was in her hands. Her thumb moved across the braid in a slow, automatic pass, back and forth, a gesture so habitual it was probably invisible to her. He noticed it. He said nothing about it. The next 2 days were a negotiation in which only one side knew they were negotiating. Vaila produced scrolls. He could not read Orcish. She produced a translator. The translator was also holding a cord. Dex pointed this out. The translator stepped back and looked at the ceiling with the professional neutrality of someone paid to not have opinions. She walked with him through the stronghold's upper corridors, explaining the debt ceremony in detail that he did not request, in language that was ceremonially precise and somehow also, at moments, slightly impatient, the impatience leaking through the formality like light under a door. He discovered that she had memorized the entire fortress layout during her captivity, not just the drainage passage, but every rotation, every structural weakness, every supply route. She had done it the way he would have done it. Not for comfort. For control over whatever came next. He discovered, during a meal he had not asked to be invited to but had attended because the alternative was his room, that she had read every major trade agreement negotiated by the surrounding human territories in the past 40 years. She had opinions about 3 of them that were more specific than the opinions held by the people who had written them. He did not compliment her on this. He was aware that this was becoming harder. On the second night, he sat on the floor of his room with his back against the wall, old habit, always the wall, and thought about the cord. It was a real tradition. He had looked into it, in the Stronghold's small library, using a text with enough illustrated diagrams that the language barrier was manageable. The binding of debt. A cord tied at the wrist, worn until the boundaries of the obligation were agreed to be satisfied. Ancient practice. Serious practice. In the illustrated history, rulers had worn these cords for years. He thought about 4 months in a cell. He thought about the bruise on her jaw, now nearly gone. He thought about the expression she had made when he popped his shoulder back in and kept moving, and the way it had been so quickly locked away. He thought about the cord being red and black, tight woven, the colors positioned over the pulse point. He knew enough about combat tradition to know that cord placement was not accidental. He found her in the courtyard at mid-morning of the 3rd day. She was standing in the center of it with the cord in her hands and the full court technically occupied elsewhere, and she looked, not uncertain. Vaila Grethorum was clearly not a person who did uncertain. But she was standing very still, and the cord was not moving, and her thumb was doing that automatic thing across the braid again. He walked over and put his back against the courtyard wall. "What do you actually want from this?" he asked. She looked at him. Sharp, assessing, doing the automatic read that people trained in courts do, measuring angles. He waited. "The ceremony," she started. "From the ceremony." "From the debt." "What do you want it to do?" Another read. Calculating. Then, nothing. Not a pause before an answer. The actual absence of one. She had run the calculation and the answer was not there, and the absence was in her face for approximately 2 seconds before everything locked back down, but 2 seconds was enough. He had spent a long time learning how to watch people in those 2 seconds. She was still holding the cord. Her thumb was moving. "You've been running protocol," he said, without judgment. "Just observation. Since the courtyard. Since we arrived. Protocol is. I know what it is. I'm saying you've been running it continuously for 3 days, which means you were running it before that, and probably before that, for 4 months, because that's what you do when the alternative is something worse." He paused. "That's not a criticism." She looked at him. He looked back. The courtyard was very quiet. "You can tie it on," he said. "I'll wear it. We call the ceremony done, you get whatever the ceremony gives you, I get the gate opening." Her jaw tightened. "That is not what the ceremony gives me." "Then what does it give you?" The silence was different now. The texture of it had changed. She looked at the cord in her hands, and the look was not ceremonial. "A reason," she said finally. Very quietly. In a voice that had nothing to do with the courtyard voice. "A formal reason." 2, she stopped. He did not prompt her. "You did not look at me like they did," she said, and stopped again, and seemed almost surprised to have said it. He understood what she meant. He did not say so. He let it be what it was. "You can still tie it on," he said. "I meant it. I'll wear it. It will not work if you do not." Vaila. It was the first time he had used her name. "Tie it on." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she took his left wrist, which he held still, and began the knot. Her hands were precise and practiced and they did not shake. The braid went over the pulse point, exactly where it was meant to go, and she finished the knot with 3 specific passes that had probably been the same 3 passes for centuries. She did not let go immediately. He did not move. Then she released his wrist and stepped back into formal posture and said, in the courtyard voice, clear enough to carry, that the dead of the Iron Throne had been formally bound, and that it was so witnessed. From somewhere in the upper corridors, he heard the scribes confirming it. He left at mid-morning. The gate opened. The worker with the tools was not there. The side passage was clear. His horse was ready with his pack already secured, and he had the particular suspicion that the pack had been reorganized while he slept, and that the reorganization was better than his original arrangement, and that he was never going to be able to prove this. He rode east. The cord was on his left wrist. The red and black braid moved when his hand moved. He did not look at it often. He was aware of it constantly. He stopped at dusk in a small town 2 hours from the border, found a room above a tavern that smelled like rain and iron, and ate a dinner that was ordinary in all the ways the Orem stronghold had not been. He fed his horse. He sat by the single window and watched the street go quiet in the way streets go quiet in small towns when the work is done. He had not opened the letter until then. One of Vaila's advisors had pressed it into his hands at the gate, slightly winded from the walk, and had said with great care, "The heiress does not write letters. You should know that." Dex had put it in his coat pocket and had thought about it for 2 hours and had opened it now because 2 hours was apparently his limit. It was not long. It identified a problem in a territory 3 weeks northeast. A specific kind of problem requiring specific skills. It described the situation in the same efficient language she had used in the tunnel when she told him to go left, direct, no decoration, already past the part where it asked nicely and into the part that assumed he was listening. At the bottom, in handwriting that started formal and got slightly worse as the line went on, as if the writer had been fighting something with every word. The debt is not discharged. He read it twice. He held the letter for a moment. Then he set it on the windowsill and looked at the cord on his wrist and thought about a woman who did not write letters, who had spent 4 months building a map in her head against the day she would need it, who had stood in a quiet courtyard holding a braided cord and run out of protocol and had not hidden it fast enough. He thought about 3 weeks. He thought about Northeast. He folded the letter and put it in his coat, close to where he kept things he was going to need again. He banked the lamp. He lay down on a bed that was ordinary in all the ways that mattered. In the morning, he started packing.